Good day, everyone. Welcome to the John Rush Show. For those new to the show, I am a farmer from Seymour, Indiana, chicken farmer from Seymour, small town USA, birthplace to John Cougar Mellencamp. In 2024, I attempted to run for United States Senate as your conservative farmer and candidate as a non-politician, but that got stopped by the Jamie Knoll Indiana GOP establishment. There's news about this week. Former Scott County Sheriff arrested on tax evasion charge connected to, guess who? Jamie Knoll, former 9th District Republican chairman. The folks that went out and endorsed Jim Banks, one's sitting in jail, one's charged right now, and then you have other people like Diego, and it doesn't look good for those that endorse Jim Banks. There seems to be open jail cell for those type of people. Kenneth Eubanks, former associate of Knoll, this is from the Courier-Journal by Leo Bertucci, this was published on April 17th, faces a felony tax evasion charge in relation to a state police investigation into Eubanks' actions as a consultant for Knoll while Jamie Knoll was in office. The sheriff's deputy was interviewed by state police investigators, reportedly said Knoll's vast political influence as chairman of the Indiana Republican Party's 9th District helped Eubanks earn the Scott County Sheriff appointment. And we saw what Jamie Knoll's endorsement for Banks and, keeping me off the ballot, that's what they are all up against. It's lockstep together. Folks ask why I'm doing the show. I'm doing this to raise the curtain and shine the flashlight, not on just Washington, D.C., but what's going on here in our own state. Judas Iscariot. Judas betrayed Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane in exchange for 30 pieces of silver by kissing him on the cheek so that he could be identified by the Roman guards for arrest. To cross this analogy over to today, it is what these career politicians are doing. When they shake your hand or when they are kissing you on the cheek, their hands reaching around to pick your pocket. They want that 30 pieces of silver. 30 pieces of silver was the price that Judas Iscariot got for betraying Jesus. How much was that? It would buy a small plot of land. The best estimate is it's worth today about $25,000 to $33,000. It's what Judas Iscariot got for betraying Jesus. And that's, Jim Banks is taking money from all these defense contractors. He lives in Virginia. He refuses to meet with regular Hoosiers. If he comes here, it's only to a Lincoln Day dinner briefly. Then he flies out where he'll glad hand the establishment. But then he's off to Virginia very quickly right after. He doesn't even want to stay the night here. Back to these pieces of silver. It's what these politicians do. They spend all their time dialing for dollars. It's the only skill they have. They're certainly not producing anything. Can anyone name one thing the Republican Senate has done since Donald J. Trump was sworn in as president in the last 3 months? We're past 100 days now. Nothing. Other than raising our debt by $5 trillion. Jim Banks and Todd Young both voted for that. It's Tweedledee and Tweedledum. And then there's this other guy in Indiana named Carlo Yodler, who he actually voted for in Indiana when he was in the state Senate, a income tax for local counties. State Assembly just passed HB1, being portrayed as a tax cut, but it's actually a tax increase. Whenever a politician says it's a cut in the rate of growth. That's a big difference. It's not an actual cut. For instance, my own personal property tax and house tax went up $800 last year. So I will be eligible now, based on this new program, to receive $300 back. So I'm still getting a $500 increase. But to the Indiana Republican Party, that's a tax cut, a $500 increase. Why did Judas betray Jesus? It's all for the money. Career politicians always betray their voters. Why do they always pretend to be conservative, especially here in Indiana, but then deliver what I call liberal results? And where has Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith been on all this? Last week, when this was still rolling around in the assembly, he was out running around on the Twitterverse, running around with an influencer. That's great. That's fine, but it should be on his own time. If you're elected to public office, you need to put in the office hours and work at the State House to get the bills made to actually be cuts. Instead, he went AWOL. He skipped town. That's not right. We can't just be, worried about our fancy offices like Diego Morales and Micah, where, Diego bought this fancy carpet, I guess, with the Secretary of State's seal embroidered into the carpet. I'm sure it's beautiful, but is that necessary? No. Is it necessary to spend $90,000 for luxury SUVs for Diego and Micah? No. We need to have people who show up for their job that they're actually elected to. And that's not just running around and glad-handing people at Lincoln Day dinners. It's actually showing up in Indianapolis and working to make sure the bills that are passed are actual tax cuts and not increases like we just did with the property tax. Because guess what, folks? Your taxes are going up. They may say it's a decrease. That's false. It's an increase. And it's even worse because now these Carlo Yodler income taxes are going to go up at the local level. What's up with that? Why do we have that coming up when, counties are still getting more money than ever? So I'd say, Micah, you're president of the Senate. Do your job. Preside over the legislative sessions. Don't disappear. Don't go on a road trip in that luxury car. Stay here in Indy and work to get meaningful reform done here. Our job is not to be out on the Twitterverse. There's this little thing, the House Committee advanced reworked property tax, but hurdles still lie ahead. This is from the Indiana Business Journal. It said the local governments will still see a revenue increase. That's what I just said. Just a smaller one. They're getting a 3% increase rather than a 5.3 to 5.4% increase. So don't worry, you're still going to have your fire protection in schools and all that. They just won't be able to more roundabouts in front of them, I guess. I don't know what they're going to waste that money on, but they were going to. The Indiana state budget, this is from Michael Felker, is increasing radically over $2.7 billion. In 2025, government spending was projected to be $51.3 billion. And the proposal today is $54.1 billion, a 5.4% increase just in 1 year. No, we have to stop. I would say put an absolute freeze on it. My own opinion is we have to cut taxes and actually cut property taxes and actually cut income taxes at both the state and local level and get government spending back to pre-COVID levels as a baseline. At that level, we need to go in and start cutting what's not necessary. But until we do that, we're just going to have nothing but more government increases. And, the investment in your home, probably went up 20% on paper over the last couple of years. It's reported here that Avon schools are getting 16% more money based on the property tax this year than they did just last year. The county is taking in 13% more. Your taxes went up 14%, and they're selling this as a decrease for this $300. And what is the state doing? What is Micah Beckwith talking about? And the Speaker of the House, Todd Houston, they're talking about the Indiana-Illinois border. They're throwing a squirrel in a room on this non-issue to say, oh, look, they're thumping their chest. We're going to have more counties from Illinois join Indiana. No, folks, the people in Illinois, they're not going to join another high tax state. Indiana has the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country. We're not that far from Illinois. Do you think the folks in Illinois want to join our tax plans here? They're going to want low taxes. They're not going to want high taxes. That's a non-starter. It's a political stunt. And it's throwing a squirrel into the room to divert your attention from property tax increase that you actually just had. When we come back, folks, we're going to dig right back into this because there's a lot more on new taxes that the Indiana State Legislature is working on, including, guess what? Toll roads for 465, I-65, I-70, and I-74. We are already the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country, and they want to add toll roads to the roads that you and I have to travel for work. That's raising the curtain and shining the flashlight. So, folks, when we come back, we're going to get right back into that. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. Here in the studio today with me is Justin George and Aiden Marietta. Welcome to the studio, guys.
Great to be back.
Great to be here.
So, in other news, RFK Jr. was in the state this past week with Governor Braun to announce a cut in SNAP benefits for sugary drinks and, I guess, ding-dongs. Ding-dongs may still be allowed, I'm not sure. But he kind of stepped in it this week. There was something he said that hit a nerve with some people, and it just didn't sit right with me.
It did not at all. It's outrageous.
Well, what he specifically said is folks with autism cannot contribute meaningfully in society. They can't pay taxes, and
it's outrageous to say that.
And that's
lunacy.
That's lunacy. That's not right. You know, I know a lot of people with autism, functional and not, and they're still contributing. They're still human beings.
Absolutely. And because I want to comment on that, because when I heard him say that, it was absolutely outrageous. This isn't the first time he's said things like that. He kept doing this whole thing of the vaccines cause autism. I mean, I'm all for I'm against forced vaccinations. I'll make that very clear, especially with the COVID. But when he goes out and says things like that, he knows it isn't true. And just to quote Penn and Teller, they used to have this show called, I can't remember, I'm not going to say the word, but it was a show where they had that, and they discussed it. They said it was, total lies. It doesn't. And they were doing like this little magic trick to show that even if vaccines did cause autism, which side would you want the child to be on? Something like that. But when he said those things, saying he's going to find the cause of autism, we already know how it's going to go. He's going to say the vaccines. It's not true. I would love to know what the cause of it is, but for him to say that they cannot contribute positively in society is wrong. It's, in my view, it's un-American. And I just make this clear. I'm all for making America healthy, but I am not for the things that he's been calling for. Government mandates, saying somebody like, look, I'm autistic. I'm more than willing to say it. Both of us are. And for him to go out and say things like that and say these things, I'm trying to be as civil as possible, but for him to say those things when he knows it's not true is absolutely false. I still got a lot to learn, but I'm confident in myself that once I learn the lessons I need, I can contribute well in society. I want to have
and pay taxes.
Yes,
he had the goal to say that they're not contributing.
It's insane. It's go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say, Aiden, that's a great point, because the thing is, we're not ashamed to share our journey, and we believe it's just something we simply have. And actually, that's part of our Hoosier journey, where we got to know each other in 2023, and now we're going to live the American dream right here in Indiana. And the thing is, being on the autism spectrum, we think it's cool. It's a superpower. It's just something we simply have. Everything Aiden said is spot on, because here's the thing. The way that society is denigrating people like us, it's absolutely wrong. It's uncalled for. I unapologetically sit here as a proud and happy Hoosier with Aiden and John, because I am here to live the American dream, to love and treat this state well. And we've been talking about politicians and the way that they don't treat the state well. For example, they're more like, we should be taxing Diego's carpets. I'm gonna say that. And here's the reason why.
Or their SUVs.
Exactly. And here's the reason why. I stand here. Aiden and I are great friends.
Yes.
We are going to be living, and we're already living the American dream here, and we are very passionate about making sure that each and every person, born and unborn, reaches their God-given potential. And to see comments that were made like that, it is a spectrum, and no matter what levels of support people need, I say this as a proud and happy Hoosier, I believe that each and every person, like I said, should reach the American dream. We are passionate about this, and I will say this, our story is not... It is not the fact that we can't do, but it's what we can do. And to be able to we are great supports for each other. We want to have families of our own in the same area. Right. And we want to do the same things because we are living our God-given potential.
My family lived through this back in the 1980s when government very forcefully said eggs were bad for you, that they were high in cholesterol and you should not eat eggs. They wanted to restrict people from even eating eggs. I say let the government stay out of this. Let people choose what they want to eat on their own. Now, all the studies have shown that dietary cholesterol has no effect on your blood level cholesterol for most people. It is absolutely crazy that eggs were looked at as a bad food. Now it's a totally different world. Today in 2025, eggs are looked at as a superfood, which they are.
Yes.
As an egg farmer, I get to hopefully say that.
I think you're absolutely correct on that.
Absolutely. But that's where one of these first radio shows I did on the John Rust Show, I was talking about red food dye and how everyone was all, oh yeah, let's, ban food dye. And I brought up a specific example that the red food dye number 3, I think, I forget the exact number of it. It's used in jelly beans.
Yeah.
It does not cause cancer, but it may have caused a tumor, a non-cancerous tumor, in some laboratory animals if given exponential amounts. And that amounts, it was like you would have to consume 500,000 pounds of red jelly beans to have an effect.
Yes.
Over a 2-year period.
And I'd even mentioned been talking about mandating beef tallow for use of French fries. I'm not against there's some that are doing okay.
I love the beef tallow sauce.
They're okay.
But if someone, we have to quit demonizing any type of food. You can't just say, oh, all the seed oils are bad and they're going to kill you.
Exactly.
Everyone's metabolism is different.
Everything in moderation, folks. Unfortunately, we have our career politicians in Washington that just all they do is eat ding-dongs all day long, and
don't even
government gets fatter and fatter and fatter.
Yes.
And we have to pay the price for it. Washington needs to go on a celery diet today, not tomorrow. All these career politicians like Jim Banks and Todd Young, it's always the cuts. Oh, we'll talk about it in the future, what we're going to cut. And then they never actually do it. It's only an increase in spending. It's only an increase in national debt. And that national debt just increases inflation. The Indiana Republican Party, they're putting out ads right now stating property tax law just passed was a tax cut. That's false. I'm looking for the polite words to say this, but, the Indiana GOP is tinkling on your leg and saying it's raining.
And I would just add to that, Representative Thomas Massey, he made an amendment a couple of years ago. It was called a bill to kick the can down the road and for other purposes. That's what Congress is doing. That's what we see at the state level. And I would just also say this, going back to tying everything together about Aiden and I and the way that we are living the American dream and how we want our fellow Hoosiers to live the American dream. When these politicians, when they get elected and they don't, they fail people. And they do it, and they don't treat this state well because, and I'm going to use this word, they have contempt for our fellow Hoosiers. That's what it is. And they think that they're the elites. And I've even heard, for example, there's opposition to the fact that, for example, being passionate about things like Hope Florida and replicating it here. And it is, Aiden and I have a God-given right, as do our fellow Hoosiers, to live the American dream right here in Indiana. It's a great state. And no matter what these politicians say in D.C. and even at the state level, they're here to serve our fellow Hoosiers, but instead they've been serving themselves lately. If they're not serving themselves donuts,
I just want to send a little message to, if you're a kid who was like me back in the day, you might, whether you be whatever end on the spectrum you're on, don't let somebody like a Kennedy or Secretary Kennedy for that matter tell you that you're not worth it. You can pull it off. You're going to have to work a little harder. I acknowledge it. I'm very fortunate with the tools that I've had. But if I can go as far as I have, so can you. I still have a long way to go, but it can be done. Don't let some government bureaucrat and somebody from a famous family tell you that you can't do it. You can.
And I just want to say, Aiden, what you said was spot on, and here's why. I've been told part of my journey in my life, especially when I was growing up, the same thing by government officials, that this is what you can do, this is what you can't. I defied the narrative, not through me, but by the grace of God. And so I just want to give back and do what I can. And
that's what it boils down to my core philosophy, which is government should not be picking winners and losers. Government shouldn't be out calling people losers. I had the problem with Jim Banks where, that federal employee that lost his job, he was just making fun of him.
Treated him with disdain.
No, the response would be, we want you to have a job that's meaningful and productive to society where you're paying taxes and being productive.
If it had been me.
Not just to call them a name and run off.
If that worker had come to me, if I was in an elected position, he told me what was going on, I would have said to him, look, I'm very sorry that you've been put in this position. We'll see what your role was, and we'll see if we can help you find a job, because I want to make sure that you can, keep your family afloat. And I don't want to, it's tough when I know for people it's tough when they get fired. I've never been in that position. I would hope not to be, but I'd say to him, I'm sorry. I will do whatever it takes to help you in whatever way I can.
Well, we want them to be productive members of society.
But I would say that, but I would say it in a way that's not,
correct.
Same here.
Contempt. That makes me look like I have contempt.
And I would just say too, as far as a point that Aiden, you made the respond on, as far as being able to work hard and the things that we, you mentioned you still have a long way to go with some things. I do too, but the fact is, no matter what the government elected officials say, no matter what even the establishment state GOP says, I want to say this message loud and clear and peacefully. The two of us, along with all the folks that we care about, we are happy Hoosiers, and we're going to be living the American dream. We already are right here, and I would just say this. We're not going to let anybody define us, because I would also second that message that Aiden said as far as about anybody out there that may be on the spectrum, whatever levels of support that you need, whatever your challenges are, whatever your strengths and weaknesses are, you are absolutely, especially if you're right here in Indiana, you absolutely can do whatever it is that you want to and need to do, because you are valuable, and don't let any politician or anybody in the establishment define you, because they've tried to define people like Aiden and I. They've tried to define our journey, and we say we, by the grace of God, define our journey as happy Hoosiers, and that's what we need for our state. If I was an elected official, I would be working for the people, not there astroturfing as an elitist.
Boom.
Absolutely. Amen. Okay, folks, this is John Rust on The John Rust Show. When we come back, we'll get right back into property taxes and toll roads when we come back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show, and we were just talking in the first segment about the gasoline tax in Indiana, fourth highest in the nation. And that's not enough for the Indiana State GOP. No. What are they working on? This is from an article by Erica Herron, Herron. Indiana lawmakers revisit tolling for road funding fix. Why in the heck do we think there's a funding problem for our roads? We already have the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country. Good grief. So here it goes. An Indianapolis lawmaker is worried the road funding bill set to pass the state Senate this week could pave the way for tolling Interstate 465 and other interstates. That includes I-65, I-70, I-74. It's House Bill 1461. The author of that bill is Representative Jim Pressel from Rolling Prairie. He has called for a page of options to address the state's $4 billion road funding shortfall. We don't have a shortfall, folks. I'm sure it's just the rate of increase isn't what they want to see. We need to actually be cutting spending. Instead of these $3 million roundabouts, put up stop signs. They're $800 for a four-way stop. Instead, the government option is, oh no, let's do a roundabout. And we talked about this last time where there's sections of Greenwood where you're driving down the road and there are so many roundabouts, you need a Dramamine before you even drive through there, because you're going to get motion sick going through roundabout after roundabout. And just think, as you go through those roundabouts, some of those are up to $3 million a pop or more even. In Indianapolis, roughly 100,000 people drive the I-465 loop every day. We already pay the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country, and now the state legislature is now dreaming up this plan to introduce toll roads. We have toll bridges and toll roads up in northern Indiana, and toll bridges way down by Louisville, which is a whole other scam going on down there, but we'll get into that one in a later show. Folks, don't believe it. It is hogwash. We do not need tolls. We don't need higher gasoline taxes. We are already being taxed too much. Senator Aaron Freeman told Axios he was planning to introduce an amendment to try to strike the provisions to make it easier for the state to start tolling road users. The background on this bill is, as I understand it, it will allow the governor to automatically introduce toll roads without any permission. They're going to ask the federal government to study it and give a waiver so that, and snapping their fingers, they can say, oh, okay, 465 is going to be a toll road. We have to stop it now. So Aaron Freeman tried to remove the toll provisions from House Bill 1461 in committee, but his amendment was defeated. You know, they just really raised property taxes again. Now they're working on tolls for 465 and I-65, I-70. That's not what we need. We can't just keep continually adding tolls and taxes to hardworking Hoosiers. And we all know the road conditions. And like I keep repeating this like a broken record. We are the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country. Everyone's always shocked by that statement. They're like, no, that can't be. No, it's absolutely true. We are the fourth highest taxed for gasoline in the United States. We're only behind California, Illinois, and I believe Pennsylvania. So like Massachusetts, some of these liberal states, they have lower gasoline taxes than Indiana. We are number 4. Peter Blanchard wrote a good article on, this is from Matt McNally. I follow him on Twitter. He says, Peter Blanchard wrote a good article on how the state legislature controls road funding formula. The same Republicans who complain about the roads in Indianapolis are the same ones who control how they're funded. So now, we're given a choice. With the state GOP, it's tolls and high gas taxes. And if the Democrats were in charge, oh my gosh, it would just be a greenway. They would ban cars from 465 and make it a large bicycle path, most likely, and do the same thing with 65 and 70. We have a very poor choice in Indiana. We have the Democratic Party, which, wants to have men and women's sports and harm your children, and it's wrong. Absolutely wrong. But then the Republican Party says, well, we're not that bad. We'll tax you all the same as they would, but we're not that bad. And so it's the lesser of two evils. I agree with that. They are less bad than the Democrats. But we're a red state. We went for Donald J. Trump in a huge margin. We should have conservatives in our elected office, not career politicians. Back on Indianapolis and Marion County, they only spent $200 million for repaving from the gas tax money. The city is spending $305 million for pedestrian and cycling improvements. That's where the Democratic Party is, folks. So there's not an option that way. Our only option is to get the Republican Party to actually be conservative again. We can't just be throwing roundabouts and bicycle lanes on everything. The road should be for cars. On this property tax bill that just passed, unfortunately, it is an increase. I agree with Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida. He says property taxes effectively require homeowners to pay rent to the government. He says constitutional protections for Florida homeowners require approval of the voters in 2026. In the meantime, Florida needs relief. I am today proposing a plan that will result in, on average, a $1,000 rebate check for each homestead as a discount on their property taxes. So Ron DeSantis is at least delivering a $1,000 rebate. We're getting a $300 here. What is the state doing with all this money? Well, it just keeps exponentially the spending just keeps going up higher and higher, and it's the state Republican Party, and they're getting behind this guy named Carlos Yodeler, and he, when he was in the state Senate, voted to increase spending from, in 2008, for total government spending, this isn't just the budget, but total government spending, $48 billion in 2008 till his last year in office, $58 billion, an increase of $10 billion. That's a 20% increase. And he wants to run against Todd Young. That's just Tweedledum and Tweedledee. They're cut from the same cloth. They are career politicians. He was in the state Senate, and he was a lobbyist. And so he gets paid to go around and lobby government officials for whatever position he's getting paid to do. So guess what? Now he wants to go to Washington and do that. But and like I said, he's also one of those responsible for a local income tax at the local level. Oh, it's just tax and spend, tax and spend, tax and spend. That's all we get. But it comes back to when these politicians go around and say, hey, I'm a conservative, you have to look at what they really do when they first get into office. We've seen some bad things, not just with Diego and his $90,000 SUV, or I think it was $80,000, but it was a Yukon Denali, which is the highest trim level you can get on that model. And then Micah Beckwith bought a Tahoe High Country, That is the number one most expensive premium version, their most expensive model. Micah defends it by saying, well, and this is a quote from him, "We needed a car that was big enough for the guys on my team because the previous lieutenant governor had a smaller car because she had a bunch of women that would travel with her, and we got some big guys that go with us," Beckwith told the Indianapolis Star. In her defense, Suzanne Crouch, she campaigned for governor, and she had a good plan. And a lot of people said, well, there was no meat behind it, but at least she was talking about ending the state income tax. It was axe the tax. We have to get to that conversation. Instead of talking about increasing taxes like the rest of the Republican Party, we have to get to where we are actually decreasing. And you're not going to have people in government who are really concerned about cutting spending if all they're worried about is their expensive carpets and trucks like Diego Morales and Micah Beckwith. You have to get people in there that will say, hey, I'll drive the older vehicle, or I'll drive the base trim model. You know, in government, I remember back in the day, I said this last week, you know, back in the day, a government vehicle, you know, would have a heater and an AM radio back in the 70s and 80s. I mean, it wasn't, you know, a luxury. Now they're traveling around in deluxe luxury and the most extremely costly models available for that. And then they talk about, well, the property tax is going down. No, it's going up. And, you know, just this last week, Union Township approved a $1 million bond for EMT staffing and equipment amid funding cut fears. Now, that's not, the funding cut is not an actual cut. It is actually a decrease in the rate of increase. So they're still getting more funding, just not at the rate they want. So they're introducing all these bonds, which, you know, the local taxpayers will have to pay for. Whether you like it or not, your rates are coming up. When we come back, folks, we'll get right back into this. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show here in the studio today with Justin George and Aidan Marietta. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So in other taxes, the Indiana State Legislature is working on, the Indiana Chamber of Commerce is pushing this one. They're calling for an increase in cigarette taxes. I'm saying, no, we have enough taxes on cigarettes. Yes, cigarettes are bad. It's freedom of choice in this country. We shouldn't be forcing
Exactly.
My
people.
advice, don't smoke.
Don't smoke.
If you can't, don't drink. But, you know, taxing is just
It's another tax.
It's just another tax, and I don't think
Right.
it doesn't do much of anything.
Well, it's a nanny state. You know, I am a huge fan of Margaret Thatcher. It's one of the reasons I am just a hardcore conservative. She says socialism has only one remedy for anything: spend more of the people's money and raise higher taxes. That's really where we are with the Indiana GOP. It's just more government for everything. The American dream is not that every American must be level with every other American. The American dream is that every man must be free to become whatever God intends he should become.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And that was actually from Ronald Reagan. That was from Twitter on Thomas Sowell's quotes.
Interesting.
In other news this week, the Atlantic magazine, who Jim Banks just loves, he was, you know, out running around with the Atlantic reporters.
Back in 2017, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyhow, they this is the quote: "A rise in sexual assaults by migrants is a price worth paying to end racism."
That's insane.
What on earth is that about?
What is
No.
that? Who wrote that?
Debbie Goldstein.
What's the my question, Miss Goldstein? Why would you say something like that? That's just not right.
Exactly. Not right at all.
Well, that's the conversation that the Atlantic magazine's having here, and that's what's going on in the United Kingdom right now.
Yeah.
They are facing these grooming gangs. They're going around raping children and women. It's not right, but the government is putting up for it, and they're saying you have no right to even report it. You just have to accept it.
It's wrong.
It's awful.
And that's what the left is talking about here. It's, you know, so, okay. In other news, Donald Trump signs by far the most important executive order to date, securing future elections so Democrats can't steal them. This executive order will ensure federal funding is cut to any state that refuses to secure elections. This is extremely important. Where in the heck has the Congress and the Senate been on this? They have done zilch, zip, nada on this. Not one Trump executive order has been codified into law by the Senate or the House. Jim Banks and Todd Young are waiting out. They're just, waiting. They're waiting.
Career politicians.
Well,
they're just not doing anything. They're just sitting around and waiting.
They thump their chest and say, "Oh, I'm Trump's biggest supporter." Well, Jim Banks does. Todd Young at least doesn't pretend to be a Trump supporter.
Yeah, he said he wasn't going to vote.
But they're both doing exactly the same thing. They are playing out the clock, just waiting for Trump to go away, so that they can keep spending at the rates they're doing. Look at what's happening in my own congressional district. Erin Houchin refuses to meet in or hold town halls right now. The Democratic Party held one. I guess they invited her. She didn't show up.
Well, they even had an empty seat for her as well. Apparently,
they've been doing things like that across the.
Well, it's one of the reasons I like Victoria Sparks. At least she shows up.
She does,
and
yes.
she shoveled it back hard. She did not shy away from the fight. Jim Banks ran off. He refused. He just sent donuts to one.
Yeah.
He didn't even show up. He turned around and got back on a plane.
Office, at least show up to meet
constituents.
constituents.
He wanted to make himself look tough. If it's like you're trying to look like you're going there, sending donuts is not the way to go. I'm
well, and then
I like donuts, but come on.
Me too. Exactly. It's like, and that's the thing. These cheap political stunts. That's exactly what Jim Banks has been doing, and just like changing his profile picture on his official Senate thing. That's real work for our fellow Hoosiers, isn't that?
I think
that was when he was going in the elevator.
Exactly.
Is that the only thing he's done in the last 100 days?
I know that's things like that. Well, even during the campaign, I remember he changed that to when Biden was wearing the MAGA hat.
Right. Well, we need, if you're there, you should be working to secure the border, getting the border wall built from the Gulf of America to the Pacific Ocean. Not just border security, but an actual border wall. The cost back in 2017 when the Republicans in the House blocked President Trump's border wall was $17 billion. Instead, we're getting much more than that spent on quote-unquote border enforcement, which really just means hiring more concierges to handle the luggage of illegal immigrants. Never forget, Jim Banks was running around with the Atlantic magazine bragging and saying we needed an influx of immigrants. Well, he certainly got his wish. Back on the budget, Chip Roy, he texted this the other day. Obama's final budget projected $6 trillion in spending in 2026. That was Obama. Carlos Yodler, he wrote the bill praising President Barack Obama, and now he wants to. Anyhow, we are at $7 trillion now. So Obama's dream was $6 trillion, and we're at $7 trillion today with what the GOP in the Senate is working to pass and has passed and has voted for. It's crazy. If the GOP can't cut spending, it's over. And this is a direct quote from Chip Roy, rolling over for socialism is a sad legacy.
He's absolutely correct. He should be running for governor of Texas. Somebody like him, they could use him, not Abbott. I'm sorry.
Exactly.
Abbott's just not doing his job.
Well, and Chip Roy, he, as a representative, he's done good. And the thing is, it's the state of Texas, they would absolutely benefit from his leadership as governor. That's the thing. A lot of these, like what you see going on with Governor Abbott right now, he talks, but you just see this all over the place. Look at what some so-called Republicans, aka rhinos, are doing in Florida. They're going against Hope Florida as well, trying to take that away. They have no proof of
against
anything.
the real conservatives.
Yeah, exactly.
A program that is saving millions of dollars.
Something that Aiden and I look up to as we live the American dream right here.
It's asinine, right?
Well, and the thing is,
they're still on vacation. The Senate, as we speak, they're on another 2-week vacation. The House, I saw the figure. They have only worked 25 days this year. My gosh, that's 25 days.
25 days. That's a lovely deal.
And what they hide behind is, we don't have enough Republicans.
They love hiding behind that.
I think we're at a 4-seat majority in the House now because we gained a few seats.
We gained a few seats.
We did.
Right. But Daniel Horowitz says this. He says this is unpopular but true. If the House had another 10 seats, fundamentally it would be the same issue. You could have another
Absolutely.
100 seats in the House, and it would make no difference.
You could have all the seats.
These,
And they would have the same excuse every single time.
they would, oh, we will cut funding in the future. You know, we want our ding-dongs today. We want massive spending to continue. We want massive debt to continue because they vote for it. Jim Banks votes for it. Todd Young votes for it. Aaron Houchin votes for it. The only person that did not from the Indiana Republican delegation is Victoria Spartz.
And kudos to her for doing that.
Absolutely. All they do is go on vacation. They are not, altogether they make $200,000 a year and they work so little. And
they don't serve our fellow Hoosiers. They go on vacation, and then they come back here, and they talk about what they're going to do, and they don't do it.
And imagine that kind of deal in the private sector. Wouldn't that be lovely?
Yeah. So, folks, another show has come to an end, but I want to thank everyone for listening and close with our favorite Bible verse, Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next week on the radio.